shared something that warmed my heart, and it did something really great for me. Um, that I want to talk about for a little bit. You
Okay.
uploaded your 1986 recording of Windows.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's just Windows was like, I really want to try this, and I barely had the um self-esteem, at the time to go, I'm going to try and do a all vocal thing,
Mhm.
the self-belief, I guess is what I mean, as far as can I do this? And it was, I think everyone in the band at the time was like, wow, this is weird. That would have been Madhouse, like
Yeah,
later Madhouse.
yeah.
But with Faith in the Muse, it was so much more of let's try everything, let's do everything. And that's when I was thinking, well, I really like to take this idea and redo it in a kind of new way with, different lyrics and that type of thing. So
I
I
see.
think that's so, but yeah, Windows I found it on an old cassette tape.
Mhm.
I found it where I was able to digitize it and get it out. And I thought, I'm just going to throw this out here.
Thank you for doing that. So
Well,
the
thank
reason I
you
bring
for
that up,
appreciating it.
the
Yeah.
reason I bring that up is because I'm also in a band and a musician. And when I heard that, it took me back to the 90s when I was recording I would go to Radio Shack, buy these
Yeah.
cheap little recorders. You had the RCA cables
The
and
little four
yeah,
tracks.
exactly the four track.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you had
Yeah.
to mix everything together.
hmm
And
Mix it down, which isn't that fascinating? Because then you find out like the Beatles did that.
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? Like you
yes,
realize that something that seems so kind of low-fi for us, but what we did is how it was done.
yes. The
Yeah.
way it was done, the way it sounded, Windows.
Yeah.
As I was listening to it, and your voice was so like you to me, you sounded like you must have been in high school or something.
Yeah, I think I was probably maybe 18,
Okay.
maybe 18. Yeah.
So it was so
Yeah.
precious to me. That and it took me right back to recordings of mine that I did back when I wanted to be this rock star. And so I had all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Yeah.
And I also did tracks where I would layer my vocals because I didn't know how to play any instruments. All I
Yeah.
had was this Casio keyboard
Yeah.
that my parents got for me. So I would play basic things on that. And then I would layer my voice. And I was really proud of that then. And it is the most painful thing that those recordings don't still exist somewhere.
Oh, you don't have them. You don't have them.
No, luckily I have
Oh,
my early movies that my
yeah.
my brother and I made when we were
Yeah.
kids. I have a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff, but
hmm
um, but people do not know the value of those early recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
fact
And
that
it's not good also if you have an early recording. I know a lot of musicians who would go, "Oh, I can't even listen to that, blah, blah, blah." I'm like,
Mhm.
you should listen to it because it's a part of you and it's how
Yeah,
you grew.
yes,
And you can't judge who you are now by that. You have to listen to it and take it for this was a young person figuring things out,
hmm
you
And if
know?
it weren't for that, you wouldn't
Yes,
be where you are now. Everybody has
exactly.
to cross through those things, and I'm the same
Yeah.
way with my movies. I
Yeah.
don't show people the movies I made in the 90s because they make me cringe.
Are they
However,
horror? What are they?
I started in horror
Yeah.
because in the 80s, growing up and watching movies, I didn't think I'd ever be the kind of guy who could make that. I always wanted to make movies, but
Yeah.
I'd watch James Cameron films and I'd think, "Oh, wow,
Yeah.
that's what it is." And then
Yeah.
it wasn't until I saw Evil Dead that I thought I could do that.
Totally.
So Evil
Totally.
Dead
Yeah.
was what
Yeah.
taught me, oh, I could do that. Like that's just
Yeah.
a bunch of kids getting together with a
Yes.
camcorder and making something.
And
So that's
making
what I
something ridiculous. But I remember when I saw Evil Dead, I saw it at the Ontario Theater in DC, and I had to leave and go to the lobby because it was so messed up.
yes.
that was such, I
Yeah.
mean, and it wasn't really, it was, I mean, the makeup was bad and there was goo and it was ridiculous,
Yeah.
but got you to the point you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here. And
Yeah.
I love horror movies, but Evil Dead was one of the first movies where it's like, I got to go and go to the lobby for a little bit.
Yeah.
And, I think more than anything, it was
Oh gosh.
it was just too much. It was so unnerving, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
And you go back
and
and
it wouldn't stop.
yeah, it wouldn't stop. You go back and look at these things now and they're
Yeah.
laughable.
Yeah.
But there is such passion in the way things used to
Yes.
be.
Yes.
Those kids, now I'm a huge Bruce Campbell fan, and I'm calling them
Mhm.
kids because
Yeah.
compared
Yeah.
to, if you pause the world, when they
Yeah.
made those, they were definitely kids. And I've watched
Yeah.
how they blossomed into nobody would know where they came
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
But luckily we have a record of all this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was what told me I could do this. I can make movies. So my first
Yeah.
few movies were terrible, and I was trying to be Evil Dead. But it was because of those awful things that I grew and eventually just, I became less embarrassed by my work as time went by.
Yeah.
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 But all this to say, coming back to Windows, the fact that you released that warms my heart because not
Oh,
only will
thank
that
you.
show new musicians that you don't always get to hear where the big superstars are starting. All you hear is the end result and the thing that made you this big fan. But what you did was remove that barrier and said, "This is a part of my early process. This is what
Yeah.
I sounded like when I was 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was experimenting with something that people thought might have been weird. But
Yeah. Back then,
ultimately,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
ultimately, what people, the real fans love, it all sparks from those kinds of beginnings. So thank
Yeah.
you for sharing
Well,
that.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, I'd like to mention two of your other songs. The other two reasons that I'm like, I've got to talk to her. So Cantus was my introduction to your music. And once I had a whole bunch of the albums, I have a lot of favorite songs, but there were a few very specific ones. One of them that you put out in more recent years, A Good Thing,
Yeah.
on your solo work. When I listened to the lyrics to that, and I know everybody does this, but I was like, I feel like she's singing this song to me because I related to so many to the
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
you write. It becomes so relatable for um, in my case, for the person who didn't have a ton of friends in high school because he
Yeah.
was still looking for his people.
Yeah.
And I found my people, and I'm very happy, and I don't have to prove myself the way I thought I did back
Yeah.
then. But
Yeah.
many of the things you sang in that song in particular, and a number of others,
Yeah.
um, really reach out to a person who is looking for themselves.
Because it's me. It's from me. It's funny because I wrote that for the 5-year-old me.
Yeah,
So I basically was telling the odd kid that I was, I was basically wrote it, and I actually, while writing those lyrics, I actually was teary because I was kind of like speaking, like telling her. And the thing is I've talked to people who, they got hit by that song too because they were the same, you
hmm
know, the strange, odd kid that has all these dreams and songs and films, movies, things in your head, and nobody else seems to get you,
yeah.
you
And they
know?
all say the word weird. I got called
Yeah.
weird so much.
Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
what a wonderful thing to do because not only does that heal you to be able to sing a song to your younger self,
Yeah.
'cause I think we can retroactively heal ourselves.
Oh,
Um,
we have to. We absolutely do. You have to be okay with the kid that you were. And
oh yeah,
sometimes you have to let them know you love them. Sometimes you have to be the one to tell them that,
yes,
especially if you didn't get it.
Yeah.
You as an adult can go back in your mind and just say, you were actually a cool little kid. And
Yeah.
if I'd
Yeah.
been your mom, you know,
Yeah.
trying to figure out who you are
Hmm.
is so big when
Yeah.
you're little. When you're little and you're trying to figure out who you are and figure out what kind of person you are, and you don't know, and you're kind of mirroring back what is thrown at you,
Right.
especially if you're just trying to get through. You're trying
Exactly.
to survive, as it were. So you
Yeah.
do tend to like, sure, I'm what you want me to be. Yes, yes, I'm sure, but I'm actually not. I'm
Yeah.
actually somebody very different, but finding your identity as a
Hmm.
kid. And that's why, I mean, for me, it was the punk rock scene
Yeah.
because, I was a total weirdo as a kid. I was like, I was an outsider, in Virginia. I was an outsider everywhere because I was, when you look back on it, I would say I was too smart.
Mm.
I was too
Hmm.
smart, so I didn't play the dumb girl thing.
Yeah.
I didn't go after the, try and look a certain way. I was very much like a tomboy, but I guess I don't know what terms are anymore. So,
Me neither. And I'm not
you
trying
know what I
anymore to
mean?
understand them. If my daughter wants me to use a modern term, she'll teach it
Yeah,
to me.
yeah,
Otherwise, I'm going to stick with I know what a
yeah,
tomboy is.
yeah,
The friends that I did have were tomboys.
yeah.
And or just other outsiders that were on the side of the playground that I would go and look at bugs with. So
Yeah, right?
I
Oh,
think
I used to keep earthworms after it rained. I used to collect earthworms and keep them in my desk so I could because I thought I was going to be a big veterinarian for a while. So
oh,
I would have earthworms in my desk that I was trying to rehydrate. So
uh-huh.
I would put water on them and keep them, and then I would release them during lunch. And I remember that was such a weird thing to do, right? Some little, 8-year-old, 9-year-old collecting worms and trying to hydrate them inside her desk.
Oh,
And I remember some kid was like, she's got worms in her desk. And the teacher didn't believe him. I was like, what's he talking about? I mean, hilarious, goofy, weird stuff. But, that was, those are the little details that makes us who we are.
thank you
So,
so much for sharing that story with me. That it shows that you have always been one to want to heal. But more than that, like, okay, I will say that if we had gone to the same elementary school or wherever, I think
yeah,
we would have been very good friends.
probably would have been.
I
Absolutely.
loved
Yeah.
insects. I loved
Yeah.
beetles and crickets, and I was this little scientist, and I wanted to understand why they were so different from me. And
Yeah.
and so I
Yeah.
was just fascinated. And my parents one day said, "Go out and make friends." And so they made me leave the backyard and leave my little animal farm.
Whereas if you had been the father of you,
Mhm.
who was out there looking at insects, you probably would have gone out there going, what are you looking at?
Yes, I do that
Right?
with my daughter now.
Yes. What are
Um,
you looking at? Wow. Like, in other words, we have this thing that we want to nurture uh because we knew what it was like to be little and be kind of, you know,
and yeah, and
yeah.
not be a little different from the jock or the whatever other
Yeah.
stereotypical word you want to use. But
Yeah.
your story also reminded me. I think my favorite insect, which I think is like insect plus, more than an insect, is a praying mantis.
Uh-huh.
And in Virginia,
Yeah.
there are a ton of praying manti.
Yeah.
So I had one as a pet, and I think it actually liked me. Part of your song that spoke to me is the lyric, "You speak to animals and they understand."
Yeah.
I've always spoken to animals, and
Yeah.
this praying mantis and we would look at each other in the face, and and it knew that I would go out and bring it crickets every day, and I would put my hand out, and it would crawl out of this habitat that I made, onto my hand, and then I had a little um, leash that I had made out of dental floss, and
Hmm.
and I would put it over its head and gently like attach, and then
Hmm.
we would go for walks in the yard. And so I would walk with this dental floss
Wow.
leash and a praying mantis. I have not thought about this in years, and you brought it out
Yeah.
to me today.
Well, how old were you?
Oh boy, this would have been late elementary school, I think. So
Maybe
fourth or
10.
fifth grade area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I found your music at a time when I was listening to my metal music when I needed to deal with the aggression in my life, and then
Yeah.
I listened to here are my three when I was calming down and I just needed to heal. There was you, Enya, and Sinead O'Connor. Those
Oh, wow.
you were my only three um, that I
Wow.
would listen to when I just needed to center and be okay.
Yeah.
Um, and the three of you did something different.
Yeah, I
Um,
was going to say Sinead was very, very different as far
yeah.
as the pain she came from,
Mhm.
and very frank. I tend to be a bit more lyrical,
Mhm.
and she would be much more frank
Yeah.
about, how she's feeling, you know.
Yes.
Um, and it's hard because I feel like, speaking of Sinead, I feel like she didn't get past that suffering,
No, she
you know?
didn't. Um,
Yeah.
and I had seen footage of her being booed off stage and things, and
Oh,
it hurt my
mm,
heart so
yeah,
deeply.
yeah,
Um, that somebody would open up when you're on stage, you're really opening up yourself
yeah,
in front of hundreds to who knows how many
yeah,
people.
yeah,
And when things like this happen, it's absolute cruelty.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
The thing
to
is I'd have to say I feel lucky that I've always been in the underground.
mhm,
I feel that, where Sinead, I don't think when she became such a pop star, I don't think she was mentally, emotionally mature enough
right,
to be in that.
I would agree.
And I think that was a really rough thing. And
Yeah,
so I have to think about that as far as how would I have dealt with that, So that's
yeah.
that's like at this level that that I can't connect with.
But now that we're talking a bit about live shows, now I'm curious. I know what my wild experiences have been with my band being out there,
Yeah.
but I am curious to hear about some things moments that stood out for you, either on tour or while you're on stage. Has anything that's happened? Any
That
fun stories you want to share?
it's hard to think about. I will say one of my favorite experiences was the Strange Boutique reunion show we did in DC. Because we hadn't played for many years. It was only 2 years after Fred got murdered, and we were actually that's what brought the whole show together is let's do this show for Fred. And it was such a great show because the place was packed and everybody knew every song. And we all like, there was such a connection that night. It was so great. And not only that, I really felt Fred was there because so Dennis DK, our new guitarist, Fred basically taught him. So I felt like Fred had pretty much chosen Dennis because Dennis plays like he can play Fred's lines beautifully. And so I really felt like Fred was like super happy with the show. So I would say that was one of my favorite live shows in a long time. Faith in the Muse, I would say one of the most fun times was when we played in Santiago, Chile. We needed security. It was crazy because usually, you do a show and you talk to a few fans and you walk past them. This was like crazy, like people just lined up freaking out, and you couldn't even get into the venue kind of thing. And that was a great, I mean, that was, they had been waiting for us to come forever. And we finally came and did a show, and it was just jam-packed. It was insane. That
Wow.
was a good one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like great fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'm sure you understand, you go through shows where you're on tour, and you play to three people, you know, you know,
I have
uh,
had those.
that kind of thing. And then,
Yeah.
it just it runs the gamut as far
Yeah.
as all the different experiences.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I feel like I feel very grateful because I feel like I've had a really fun life.
Mhm.
I've been able to do so many great things, and I've been able to travel and meet people all over the world, and it's been great, and that's why I am very happy actually, because I'm just doing what I want to do. Yeah,
Wonderful. And there's no better thing to say than that.
yeah,
When you have when you're doing what you're meant to do and what you chose and your vision and what you're creating line up,
yeah.
that is an extremely satisfying feeling.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Especially because, so I'm doing Strange Boutique. We've got a new album, and it's so funny because we haven't revealed the album cover yet, but you are going to love the album cover when you see it. I
Okay.
will just leave it there.
I'm excited.
Um,
So, I want to ask you a few questions about your creative process now, too.
okay.
Yes. So you've already talked some about the specific songs I mentioned, and you have this great process, but I wanted to know a little bit about some of your inspirations. And that might, I imagine, would change from song to song. And
Right now, so I'm working on my next solo album, and right now I've been reading a lot of 19th century poetry, um, and 18th century poetry too, actually. And I have been going over Tennyson's The Lotus Eaters,
oh,
and there's some insane lines in there. And so I am working on a new piece, thinking on that, thinking on the internet, thinking on social media, thinking on our current political um, stratosphere we are all in right now, and finding that there's a song, writing a song about the Lotus Eaters, which is of, his poem is about men who have found themselves shipwrecked on an island,
mhm,
and here come the Lotus Eaters, and they're giving the crew lotuses to eat. And the moment that you start to eat, you're all kind of in a haze.
yeah, a
And
phase
it just,
of
I feel
hedonism.
like there's some parallels going on. So I'm working on that. So my creative process just comes from, it could be a melody in my head, could be a melody in my head. I have a lot of things on my phone where I'm just like, I think of something and I sing it into my phone and keep it with me. And it's so funny because then I'll listen to something like months later going, what was I thinking? But it's funny. But yeah, I have like a lot of just snippets that come in. It could be a lyrical snippet. It could be, um, dealing with someone in my family, and I had this snippet that said, "Here she comes to hang her troubles on my shoulders." It's like these snippets that come in, and then I'll just kind of squirrel them away and work on them later, you know? I mean, that's really what I do. I do like, oh, really, I'm really into this. How does this feel to me? What if and then and I'm probably not being very coherent.
Oh, you are being very coherent.
But
because you
yeah,
do
I mean
exactly the
it.
same thing I do.
Yeah, so then it's about going to, writing a song and um, if the melody that is in my head, I need to get that out in piano or something, I need to transcribe it, or is it a lyric melody and I need to write music around the melody, you know?
Hmm.
So it's everything is kind of just, and then of course it's like, when do I have time to be open? Because usually if I'm working and if I'm working, and I don't have time to sit down and just, think things through and kind of um, allow yourself that free time so you can play.
Right.
That's hard. That's
Yes.
hard with all of the distractions. So it is a lot of times I have to be creating and thinking while I'm in the middle of 50 other things, you
Okay.
know? You get that?
I can relate to everything you just said
Yes.
because
Yeah.
especially the having a whole bunch of little voice recordings on your phone. I do the
Yeah.
exact same thing. I am often on the road. I do a lot of work back and forth between Richmond and Charlottesville.
Hmm.
So multiple times a week, I'm driving for at least an hour or so. And that is when I have all of my creative
Hmm.
ideas
Hmm.
while I'm
Yeah.
driving because I can't get distracted by too many other things because I'm forced to focus on the road, and that's
Yeah.
so boring that my mind wanders.
Yeah.
And that's when all of my every movie idea I've ever had is
Yeah.
basically while I'm on the road listening to music, or if for some reason I'm not listening to music, I'll just start talking to myself um, as I'm writing the script for a movie. I'll put myself into the situation, and then I'll start saying the lines that will
Yeah.
eventually become the lines of the
Yeah.
character. And
Yeah.
I can't write it down, so I turn on my microphone or the video camera, and I just record myself saying the lines or
Yeah.
humming a tune. And then when I get home, I better write it down then, because
Yeah.
if I find it months later, I'll it won't be the same.
It won't be the same because it's kind of like, where was I? What was I? What was my mindset at that time that, 3 months later you're listening going, what?
What was this?
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course,
I
when I
have
hum things,
recordings from like me being in the bathroom of an airplane going, it's just
great
ridiculous.
acoustics in there, though.
Yeah, just trying to get something out, like just a snippet, just to get it down. Because how many times have you said, "Oh, I'll remember this. I don't need to write it down, or I don't need to record it. I'll remember this," and then it's gone.
Yeah,
I've lost a lot of songs that
so
way.
have I. And I've
So
also
frustrating.
lost songs.
Yeah.
I have I have musical dreams. And
Hmm.
I have definitely had several situations where I'd wake up and scramble, and then the song is gone. But
Yeah.
I'd have a melody or something, and then I've
Yeah.
lost several songs to dreams.
Yeah.
Next, I'd like to ask you about, and this one I'm asking specifically, part of this is for my daughter. When and how did you know that you wanted to pursue music as your career?
Well, I would say that it's never been a career.
Mhm.
I've always called it my expensive hobby, because I've always had to work, full time in order to afford to do music.
I
I've
see.
never, I've always had to borrow money in order to, press something or that kind of thing. I
Mhm.
always have to crowdfund now in order to get the money up for me to be able to, get a physical piece made. So, um, as far as the fact that it is what I love to do and therefore I do it,
Mhm.
you know, um, I was writing songs and operas in my head since I was little.
Okay.
Since I was little, I had full operas in my head and they were ridiculous. It's no, she won't. Yes, she will. No, it's ridiculous things for, a little kid.
Yes.
But I always knew I wanted to do music. it was when I heard Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders. When I heard that, that's when I knew I wanted to sing for a band.
I
I
see.
don't know why. That was the song.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
never know, but sometimes there's just that little
Yeah.
flicker that goes off.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
There's
thank you.
something about that song that made me want to sing. And it was funny because I wasn't, this was pre-punk rock,
Mhm.
I think I was just 14 maybe at the time it came out.
Okay.
But it was when I was hanging out with the boys and they wanted to, let's get a girl singer for this band. And so that I was just kind of thrown into it because I was open to doing it.
Okay.
So I was in a band before Hey From Ignorance. I was in a band with these guys who later started a band called No Trend.
Okay.
And so I was singing live for them and I was just going, it wasn't, and it was just me singing, guttural, whatever,
Yeah.
because it was the first time I ever had a microphone or, you know what I mean? And it was just, it was just hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, that wasn't my goal. That wasn't my plan. That was just what happened,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
But it was from Brass and Pocket. That was what I knew I wanted to do. I think it's because her voice, like she had a low voice and it was just, I don't know, the way it touched me, it just made me go, this is what I want to do. But then I ended up as a punk rock girl
Hmm.
singing for punk rock bands. And it just slowly evolved into, I want to do something more melodic, you know?
Awesome.
Yeah, just, it was
I'm happy
very
you made that
organic,
choice.
very organic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to promote
So we have a live show July 12th at Black Cat. We're going to be playing
in
uh,
DC?
in DC.
I intend to
That'll
see
be
you there.
great. Yeah, that'll be great.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. Got a new album with Strange Boutique.
Mhm.
It's called Let the Lonely Heart Sing. And we're going to be putting that out in June and then playing a live show July 12th. And then I'm going to be going back to work on my next solo album. And that is called Hreith. And that is a Welsh word. And it means, there's no English word for it, but it is a state of mind. You'll appreciate this, um, where you're always longing for something, that there's something gone. It could be that I'm missing. I shouldn't be here. I should be out in the mountains. There's like this nameless calling to home, and that's what Hreith means. And it's a fascinating word. And so that's going to be the name of my next album.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to hearing that. That's yeah. I'm going to own that one too. Just as soon as it's out, I'll be there, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you when you come here for Strange
Yeah,
Boutique.
actually, it'll be a blast to meet you in person.
Thank you so much for talking with me tonight.
Oh
This
yeah, no, it was a lot of
been a
fun.
marvelous conversation. This was everything and more that I was hoping.
Yay.